Hello, my name is Diane, and today I want to tell you the most disappointing books I read this year. Sometimes you're just really looking forward to a book, and then you read it, and it's really not what you were expecting or hoping, and it really falls flat from what you thought it was going to be. And for me, these are all books that really just didn't live up to what I thought they were going to be. The first book is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This one was really disappointing, especially because I really loved the beginning part of the story. At the beginning of this book, we see a young girl whose name we never learn. She lives with her father and her brother. They live in very hard times, and while the brother has been destined to achieve greatness, she has been destined for nothingness. After losing her father and her brother, she realizes that her brother ended up taking her fate, so she decides that she's going to take his fate. He took her nothingness, so she is going to achieve greatness. She then takes on his name and assumes his identity, is rescued by a monk who takes her to his monastery, where she, for the first time in a long time, if ever, has now been given food and shelter and warmth, and she knows the only way to keep that and to live and survive is to continue pretending to be a boy, and she goes to great lengths to do that. I was so invested in this part of the story. I loved seeing her and the lengths she would go to keep her true identity a secret so that she can stay alive and survive and one day achieve something more than the nothingness she was promised. At the end of this part of the story, however, there is a time jump. She's now an adult, still living as a male monk. She begins getting involved in more political, military things, and her idea of achieving greatness morphs into just this terrible, power-hungry, I don't really understand her motivations or what she now thinks of as greatness other than just rising the ranks in any way possible. She does some pretty awful things and becomes a very unlikable character. Maybe that's the point of the story, but it just didn't connect with me, where we started with this really gripping story of this girl who's just desperate to live, and now she just seems to be doing horrible things for seemingly no reason. I'm sure there's some underlying motivation, but it wasn't anything that I really connected with or clicked with. The fantastical elements are kind of just put in pretty late in the story. I thought this was going to be much more fantasy than it was. I think you could have removed the fantastical elements entirely and it wouldn't have affected the story at all. So I'm not really sure why they were there at all. And I just overall was pretty let down by this. It started out really strong and then just fell flat, and the more distance I've had with it, the more I realized I just didn't like it and don't have any interest in reading the sequel because I don't want to be let down again, and I don't really care to be following this character that I don't like and seeing what other awful things she decides to do to be more powerful. The next book is For the Wolf by Hannah Witton. I don't even remember what happens in this. I was really looking forward to this. I typically like fairy tale retellings, and this one seemed like it merged a couple of fairy tales and their tropes together. It's basically two sisters. One of them is For the Throne, which is the name of the sequel, and the other one is For the Wolf, where she will be given to the wolf in the woods at a certain age. So this book begins with her preparing to be given to the wolf, and then eventually figuring out what or who the wolf actually is. We do get glimpses into the other sister's life, which is interesting, especially where she'll be the main character of the next story. And for me, this one just wasn't very engaging. I honestly, at this point, it's been a while since I read it at this point, but I don't remember too many details from the story. I just remember it was okay. A lot of it just felt too familiar. I don't feel like it did anything new enough that really stuck out to me. While this was not a bad story, and I don't dislike it, it just didn't impress me as much as I had hoped it would. And I don't plan on reading the sequel for this one either. The next book that I thought was disappointing was Turning Darkness into Light by Marie Brennan. I read the entire Memoirs of Lady Trent series this year, and while I definitely liked some books more than others, I overall liked the series. So I was curious to see what Isabella's granddaughter would be like and what sort of research she would be doing. I also knew that this was in a different format. It's written as a mixed media story rather than just the character writing their own memoir. And while I did like the format of this, you get diary entries along with letters and research and newspaper articles. I didn't really care about the plot at all. I felt like the main character is sort of just a redone Isabella, except now where Isabella had a lot to prove within the scientific community as a woman, her granddaughter really had nothing to prove. She's the daughter and the granddaughter of very successful, famous people. And I don't feel like there were any stakes within her career for what she was doing. I didn't really care about the research she was doing. I just didn't think it was very interesting. She's just translating something. And then the other characters in the book, I feel like the things they do and the things that are revealed later in the story were pretty obvious. So while I wasn't too sure what to expect with this, where I loved some of the Memoirs of Lady Trent and I really didn't like some of the other books in that series, I knew this one could be hit or miss, and unfortunately it was a miss. The next book is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I've heard so many wonderful things about this that I think it was overhyped, at least for my reading taste. I liked sort of the idea behind it, and I liked the characters of the children, but I didn't like the adults. This follows a man who is sent to investigate this boarding home for magical children who have been deemed potentially dangerous, and he is supposed to be evaluating whether or not this home should still be operating or if it is a danger to society. I really didn't like the main character. I think he was written a little too vanilla. I've seen other characters like this before where at least there's something interesting about them, or they are actually invested in doing their job well, and I feel like we were always told he only cares about his job and he kind of just exists to do his job, but I never felt like he was ever really trying that hard to do his job. He was just kind of there. And then a lot of the story is he's getting to know the children, and I loved that part of the story because I thought the children were all really interesting characters, but a lot of it is him getting to know the man who runs the home and developing a relationship with him, and I felt like that really took center stage in the story, and I really didn't care about that aspect of it. And then in terms of the theme, it was just delivered very directly, which is also something that I don't really like in my stories. I like the theme to be there, but I don't want to be told exactly, here's the lesson of this story, here's what you should take out of this, here's what this character needs to learn. And everything's just said so bluntly in terms of what the lesson is, and it's more about the adults rather than the children. So this one, still a beloved story, but not one for me. And the last book is Castle in the Air by Diana Wynne Jones. This one was a real bummer because I loved Howl's Moving Castle, so I was really looking forward to the sequel, set in the same world but following different characters. Very Arabian, Aladdin-inspired type of story. And while the premise was interesting, I just never really clicked with the story. It follows a carpet salesman who just wants to build up his business and be successful, and then he meets the girl of his dreams and wants to also find a way to make that relationship work. It does the same building of magical aspects where it starts out fairly ordinary, but there's something magical going on, and then things just kind of snowball and it becomes more and more and more, and it gets a little bit chaotic, and then everything finally settles at the end. So while I like that story structure, I just didn't feel very compelled by what the actual plot of the story was. So this was pretty disappointing, and I thought maybe Howl's Moving Castle was just really good, and then the rest of the things in the series followed sort of the same formula but with all different elements. And I almost ended the series there. I'm really glad I didn't, because the third book in the series is really good, but this one almost kept me from reading that because it just didn't deliver the way Howl's Moving Castle did. I thought that was a really fun, magical, whimsical story, and Castle in the Air wasn't that for me. So those are the 5 books I read this year that I was most disappointed by. Luckily, putting this list together, I didn't have a lot of books to choose from. I didn't have very many disappointing reads this year at all, so really can't complain. Let me know if you read anything this year that you were really looking forward to and were feeling pretty let down by. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.